Welcome to Observing Technology. This show is designed to demystify technology by asking the questions you need answers to. We try to give you advice and show you the different sorts of technology that are on the market today. We're a project of the Capital PC User Group, and you can see these shows on the Capital PC User Group website. I'm Dennis Courtney.
And I'll be your guide as we look into interesting technology for everyday people. We want you both at work and at home to take advantage of the technology that we will show you. Generally, we focus on personal computers, but from time to time we take a look at other forms of technology that we know you'll find both fun and informative. So sit back, enjoy the journey as we take a look at today's interesting technology. Today's show, it's going to be a little bit different. We're welcoming back Art Brodsky, the Communication Director for Public Knowledge, to talk about some of the latest goings-on in the telecommunication world. Art, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dennis. Good to be here.
Your group is kind of a watchdog public information group on...
Public interest group.
Public interest group, excuse
Right.
me, on the different aspects of telecommunications
Right.
and copyright, correct?
Right, telecommunications, internet policy, copyright, and especially digital copyright, talking about digital rights management, those kind of things, yeah.
Right. I've been all over your website. It's just loaded with policy and some of the history of things.
Right.
I particularly like the timeline sessions that you guys do on your website, publicknowledge.org.
Right.
Today,
and cute videos too, by the way.
I didn't go through the videos today.
Oh.
However,
However,
one of the things that I want to talk about today with you is some of the latest goings-on and some of the issues that are really hitting people today with net neutrality, I know is your specialty, and
Right.
kind of what's going on with that.
Well, the biggest thing that's going on right now is that the Federal Communications Commission is looking into what Comcast was doing to those users of an application called BitTorrent.
You want to explain to our users what
just
a torrent
about
is?
to do, Just about to do that.
Great.
As I was saying, a torrent, normally when you download stuff from a website, you sort of go to a website and say, send me this file, and it just whomps it all on down to you.
Yes, but it whomps it with the single connection.
Single
through
connection
one,
from one website down to you.
Starts at the beginning and goes to the end.
Goes to the end. Torrents are different. Torrents spread little bits of the same file hither and yon. So at the same time, you might be downloading different pieces of it from different places, and you have them in your computer, so you're uploading them too to somebody else, which is a whole different way of using the network, and in general, a more efficient way of using the network.
But it's also a way of, of course, it works faster because you're getting multiple streams and you're giving out multiple streams, because the internet isn't just a single pipe, it's many pipes.
It's many pipes. It is a series of tubes, as Senator Stevens said
yes.
memorably. So what's happened, though, is that most networks now, especially at your home, are engineered to have a heavy downstream load, but not so much going upstream, which is sort of a problem if you used BitTorrent or anything like that, which is called a peer-to-peer or P2P application, because it means instead of having one big website, you have lots of little peers. They're sort of all feeding the network. So what Comcast has been doing is decided they don't like peer-to-peer, because it had a bad reputation, and probably well-deserved over the past few years, of having a lot of illegal stuff or naughty stuff on it. So what they did was try and throttle the use of people using peer-to-peer applications like BitTorrent. And the way they did it was particularly hacker-like, is a good way to put it.
Okay.
And here's the example. Let us suppose that you and I are on the telephone, and I get an operator interjecting into my ear that says, Dennis doesn't want to talk to you anymore, he says. Goodbye, and my connection terminates. And in your ear, you get something that says, Art doesn't want to talk to you anymore. Goodbye, and ends the connection. Now, I never talked to you, and you never talked to me. There was some third party that interjected and just cut it off arbitrarily. That's what Comcast did, sending some things called reset packets, which basically terminated the connection even though neither of us wanted to. Now, the interesting part about this is that they did it regardless of the size of the file. There are a couple of experiments that were done, one by the Associated Press, one by a group on the West Coast called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And in fact, they tried uploading the King James Bible, which is, as all things go, a pretty tiny little file, and found it got blocked and delayed. So when Comcast says, well, we're trying to manage our network and keep traffic under control, is that, yeah, but this is a tiny little file. They're going after one application. It's pretty clear. And what happened earlier this week, on February 25th to be exact, is that the Federal Communications Commission held a hearing up in Boston to hear from Comcast officials, as well as from some of the best internet engineers in the country, if not in the world, about what was going on with this.
Now, this is the one that was up in New England, right?
Up in New England at Harvard Law School.
Right.
And the reason they were there was a petition that was filed by our group, Public Knowledge, by Free Press, another group, and others, which asked the FCC to rule whether what Comcast was doing constituted legitimate network management. So the question is, can you, in the name of network management, have unlimited control over your network, or do users have some rights too, to access applications and to use applications?
Yes, I know kind of the argument I know from the Comcast side has been something of, hey, this is our network, it's part of our terms and conditions when you sign on, that we can manage the network, basically. And what is the problem? Why can't they do that, or why does public not? They shouldn't be doing that.
The problem is that users have rights too. And in 2005, the FCC put out a policy statement which said, here are some rights we think internet users ought to have, including right to access content, right to use applications, right to attach devices. And what Comcast is with the use of a legitimate application.
Basically saying, sorry, you can't use this application, the peer-to-peer.
Right, right. Now, what's the interesting thing that came out at the hearing was one of the fellows who testified is a guy named David Reed, who was one of the people who you might call him one of the founding architects of the internet.
Right.
And his theory is called the end-to-end theory, which means interfering, means there's intelligence.
In any way they see fit. College think that they shouldn't be doing that.
The problem is that users have rights too. And in 2005, the FCC put out a policy statement which said, here are some rights we think internet users ought to have, including right to access content, right to use applications, right to attach devices. And what Comcast was doing was interfering with the use of a legitimate application.
Basically saying, sorry, you can't use this application, the peer-to-peer.
Right. Right. Now, what's the interesting thing that came out at the hearing was one of the fellows who testified is a guy named David Reed, who was one of the people who you might call him one of the founding architects of the internet.
Right.
And his theory is called the end-to-end theory, which means there's intelligence at one end, assuming the person using the PC is someone intelligent. We're talking about the computer design, we're just making little end-to-end architecture joke here. End-to-end means that basically in the middle is a network which simply conveys what the machines at either end want to send or receive.
So it's an agnostic network, if
Exactly.
you will.
And what Reed said was, look, we have an internet engineering task force. There are legitimate ways to manage traffic. In fact, your basic TCP protocol in which the internet runs manages traffic all by itself. So, you know, what Comcast basically did was totally out of bounds. If you want to do something, write a paper on it, come to our forums, or let the system work the way it's supposed to. That's why what Comcast did was totally egregious. In addition to which, for weeks, they denied they were ever doing it, basically lying about it. And it wasn't until the Associated Press and EFF ran their tests and said, look, here we can demonstrate what they're doing, that Comcast finally came clean. Halfway clean. They said, oh, we're not really blocking, we're simply managing, we're simply delaying. And anyone who runs a website or a web business knows that, look, if you delay, people will leave. It's like changing channels a million times. Sure. I don't sit here and wait for this site to load up, I'll go someplace else. And one of the people that did a tech demo at that FCC hearing was a company called Vuse out of Silicon Valley, VUZE. What they want to do is a high-def video service with licensed videos, isn't a pirate site, using BitTorrent. So if Comcast or any of the other cable companies want to start screwing around with BitTorrent, you're hitting these guys in the business. It's not just people who are, you know, having fun at home.
And it doesn't change the total amount going over there, it just changes how the throughput moves, essentially.
Right. I mean, what they're doing is saying, of all the stuff that's coming through the network, we are looking at these peer-to-peer packets, and we're saying, wait, we're not letting these things go, or we're just cutting it off and you have to send it again.
Now, this is a form of censorship in a way.
It certainly is. It absolutely is. I mean, what they're using is a technology called deep packet inspection to find out what those packets are. They may not necessarily be looking into the content yet, but they're certainly looking at a sufficient lines in the address to say, this is a BitTorrent application. Maybe it's a video application, and we're going to sort of chill that out for a while all this other stuff goes on.
Now, that's not, we're talking about Comcast right now, but that's sort of one area and one vendor that is encroaching into the communications end. But there are others doing other sorts of things with it as well, are they not?
There are. I mean, we have heard stories. We have not, no one's done the tests yet, but supposedly Cox is doing the same thing, another big cable operator. So if the FCC rules the right way, and there are enough commissioners were talking the right way at this hearing, we think that the cable industry, which at this point appears to be the primary culprit, will get the message real quick and cut it out.
Okay, so but I know we talked earlier, and there's some things that Verizon is doing that
Verizon
is a little different, but I mean it's another
Verizon
kind of an incursion into our rights.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what you could label this overall issue control over the network or control over people. What Verizon did last September was deny what's called a short code to NARAL Pro-Choice, which is a pro-choice group. And they wanted to be able to send text messages to their members on a quick notice. For example, I would sign up for their text messaging service, and I might get a note saying, quick, call your congressman because this vote's coming up now. Something that I opt into, something I'm doing voluntarily. Verizon told NARAL, no, you can't have a short code.
Because essentially they're
too controversial. Yeah. Right. Now, this could happen to 100 groups, and you'd never know about it. But it turned out that the people at NARAL knew somebody at the New York Times who wrote a story, put it on the front page, a firestorm ensued.
As it should.
As it should. And Verizon eventually backed off while still maintaining the right to do that again if they wanted to. So what happened in the aftermath is that my group, Public Knowledge, filed a petition with the Federal Communications Commission and said, look, in this day and age, texting is like calling, particularly if you're under, say, the age of 25. You text, you call, whatever. And that should have the same legal protections as a call. And where the comments on that petition are due in a couple of weeks on the 13th, March 13th, and we'll see how the commission rules on that. And even though it's not formally or technically the internet as is the Comcast thing, because we're talking about just texting over a wireless network, both issues get to the control issue of what rights do network operators have to interfere with an individual's communications, and what right do we as customers and users have to use the network the way we want it to.
And it's, and we're really, as the networks and the internets and these things sort of are growing up, these are the first times we're really facing these sorts of issues in these modern times.
Right, and the reason is that for the first, 70 years of the communications law, there is a part of the Communications Act of 1934, which basically says that people who offer service cannot discriminate on content. You couldn't do it. Back, 15 years ago when there were bulletin boards just starting and the whole online, I won't even say the internet, it's pre-internet.
Sure.
You had your Prodigies and AOLs and thousands of bulletin boards and internet service providers all over the country. The law said you couldn't interfere with those kind of things. But the FCC lifted those rules for the fast services for broadband, and now it's open season.
In fact, in broadband's almost in a special category by itself now.
It's in a total new category by itself. It's out from under that part of the law now, so those protections don't apply.
Okay. Well, I want you to stay tuned because right after the break, we're going to talk more with Art Brodsky from Public Knowledge about some of the telecommunications policies that you're going to want to know going on right here in Maryland. So stay tuned after the break.
Colon is the medical term for large intestine. Colon cancer kills more Americans each year than automobile crashes. Colon cancer is preceded by little growths called polyps. Polyps can be identified and removed during a colonoscopy. No polyps, no cancer. This is a colonoscope. As you see, the colonoscope can make very sharp bends at any given time. It makes it easy and safe to see the entire length of the colon. Minuscule instruments can be manipulated through the colonoscope. Many times we need to use something called a snare. A snare is a device that has a lasso configuration such that it can cut off, with the use of cautery, a larger polyp. If you're over 50, ask your doctor about a colonoscopy. Only you could prevent colon cancer.
Okay, we're back with Art Brodsky, Communication Director at Public Knowledge. We're discussing telecommunications policy. And Art, there's some things going on in Maryland right now with internet, particularly broadband type legislation that your organization has got some interesting positions on, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about them.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. There are two bills that are going through the legislature now that are of interest if you follow internet. And the basic issue around both of them is the deployment of broadband. Where is it, who has it, and most importantly, who doesn't have it? There's really no way to tell now. The FCC statistics are useless, so what Delegate Herman Taylor from Ashton, who is my home delegate, put in a bill, HB 987, which says that if you offer a broadband service, and we put a limit of under limit of 768 kilobits, which is sort of your basic DSL, in the bill, you have to report through the Public Service Commission where it is, what by zip code +4, what houses, what speeds, those kind of things, through the PSC, just a straight pass-through of data. So someone can go to a website, make up a map, and say, look, it's in my neighborhood, but 2 blocks away somebody else doesn't have it. Or it's in part of Baltimore, but you know, down south part of the city they don't have it. So what we're trying to do is actually get them to show us where it is. And then we can ask the question, why is it on my street and only, but it's not 3 blocks over?
Okay.
And then, yes, go ahead.
So that legislation is essentially just for creating a database.
Exactly, that the public can access. I mean, I can go on, I'd be able to go on to it. Cable companies and phone companies could go on and see where, you know, the other competitors are doing, and the people who run the state could go on and say, maybe we need some incentives someplace. This would show exactly where the broadband is. But of course, Verizon and Comcast are fighting the bill tooth and nail, so.
Sure, they don't want to be burdened with extra paperwork.
Well, you know, they report stuff to the state anyway. And in fact, you know, the reporting burdens these days are much lighter than they were 20 years ago. This is information they already have. They just don't want to do it because I think to some degree they're afraid of showing where the gaps are and where they are putting stuff in.
And what they're, how much they're into the markets, et cetera, though, that sort of thing too is going to come out from that.
Right.
But that's sort of a benign bill from a consumer standpoint, maybe a little positive because there's going to be some information that people can work with. But the second bill, I know when I read that bill and went through it, it sounded like a sort of a reasonable approach to deal with the gaps because it talks about a public-private partnership in the state. And what's wrong with that one?
This is Bill HB 1144. Okay. Which was put in that the prime sponsor is Delegate Tom Hucker of Silver Spring. And if you were to read this bill, as you know, 999 people out of 1,000 would read it and say, gee, what's wrong with this bill? It creates a public-private partnership. Groups go out to the counties trying to figure out where we need broadband, that kind of thing.
But it's very generic. I mean, it's almost bizarre in its language. It's so generic.
It's totally generic, and the reason is that the phone companies and the cable companies, they're shopping this identical bill around the country. I've got one in my briefcase.
Template bill.
It's a template bill from Illinois that's almost the same bill. Kentucky, same bill. And the reason this is dangerous is because this came out of a group in Kentucky called Connect Kentucky, which was formed under a former Republican governor there, Ernie Fletcher, by a guy who'd been in Bell South for 30 years and his son, who was a Fletcher staffer. They took an existing group, changed the policies of that group. And what they did was they set up a map these community teams project. They set up the was to lobby for the phone company. But what they're really there for companies. And they were proud of their lobbying for the phone companies. They put out press releases that they were lobbying for the phone companies on it. One bill in particular that one legislator said, and I quote him in one of my stories on our website, is the worst piece of consumer legislation he's seen in 25 years.
Oh my.
So what you have is the state paying the tab for this group to lobby for the phone companies. Meanwhile, at the other end, there isn't any objective evidence other than what the group itself produced to show that they're doing any good, except spending $7 million.
I'll have to get on that payroll. That's one of the interesting things. I think that's a good segue into one of the things I really like about your organization, and that's your website.
Thank you.
it really, you get into these subjects, you give the timeline, you give the players, you have a variety of writers there giving a variety of positions, you have people who are experts on their topic. Talk a little bit about your website, because I really find that really fascinating to keep track of these sorts of issues.
Well, thanks for that, Dennis. We put a lot of time and effort into the design of it. We just the one you're seeing now was a relaunch about 7-8 months ago, and we broke it up. We have sort of basic primers on issues to get people interested on what broadband's about, what white space is about, what some of our copyright issues about. We have a policy blog which goes into some depth on some of these issues, reacting to current events. We have all sorts of resources if you're looking up an FCC decision or a law or a document, court filing, that kind of thing, and just some general background on issues. So if you hear about something like a white spaces issue, you can go there and you don't have to read an encyclopedic article on it, but you'll get a general clue about what it is people are talking about.
And you do it in a very common language. It's not techie speak, and let's use the example you just brought up of the white space issue. White space, most people would ask, what is white space? I mean, we think of white space in an email message or something as space where you have that typing, but you explain it on your website that in a very general way that I think the average consumer could look at that and go, oh, okay, white space is the bandwidth between the various television signals, various channels that they're not using, that are perfectly good to use, and they should be using them. And then you talk about why, and that, hey, that particular type of signal is a signal that will go long distances, it goes through homes, walls and things, at that bandwidth that does that, and because of that it makes excellent Wi-Fi bandwidth. One of the problems we have with Wi-Fi now is it doesn't go very far. It doesn't have a strong signal. Walls stop it. And and you explain it in such common language that these very, very complex policy things I think are very straightforward on your website. I really love it. So tell whoever does your website that they did a great job.
I shall. And this white space thing is interesting because it's anytime you start talking about spectrum to a broadcaster, they immediately raise the walls, raise the shields, sound red alert. And what's happened is you have the broadcasters trying protecting all of the spectrum, whether they use it or not. And then you get companies like Microsoft and Philips who say, yeah, maybe we can use this stuff where nothing's there, literally the white space. So what's happening now is the FCC is going through some testing of devices. They're not consumer products, they're just trying to see what works, what doesn't, and how it works, and come out with a standard so that people could build devices that'll fit between the channels. And that's been somewhat controversial. The National Association of Broadcasters will put out a release saying, oh, this device failed or that device failed, and you think, gee, your little pocket PC blew up, when that's not it at all. The devices that they're testing bear no relation to anything that you would buy or use or anything. They're boxes with knobs and dials so that the engineers can figure out how much power we should have, how far should the signal go, to make sure that it doesn't interfere with TV. Because nobody wants to interfere with TV.
Right, you want to use the space that's essentially empty.
Right, and you don't want it to do it and screw up the TV. I mean, there are all these scare commercials about, oh, we just bought a $5,000 HD set, we don't want, the techies screwing it up. Well, nobody wants to screw it up, techie or not. I mean, that's the whole point of the testing, so that you write a standard from the FCC so people can make devices so these things will work. And
they'll fit into those spaces.
And they'll fit in.
And there are other people that are kind of around there. Now, there's another space. Was the 700 megahertz?
The 700 megahertz. That is an auction currently going on at the FCC. In February 2009, over-the-air TV as we know it will cease to exist. It'll go from what's called the analog signal now to a digital signal. That's what all the really tall TV towers are for. It's line of sight. Most people get their TV now through cable or satellite, so most people won't be affected, but about 20% of the country still does over the air. And what the FCC is doing is auctioning off the spectrum that the TV stations were using for this old analog signal. So that's been going on and raising some billions of dollars.
Well, I also understand that the digital signal is a more narrow signal and it uses less space. And because it uses less space, there'll actually even be more empty space because it doesn't use as much space as it was using. Is that? accurate?
I think it's accurate, yeah, but you know, that's what a lot of the testing is for. I mean, you could get into the minutia of guard bands and all sorts of other stuff talking about TV signals, and I'm sort of reaching the limit of my engineering expertise here and don't want to step over the line. But yeah, I mean, generally digital signals are more efficient, they carry more data, that's why they're doing the transition. And that's what gives us so much of a good opportunity to try and create something new where nothing is now.
Well, I think the key for all of this that sort of ties it all together, though, is that because these new bandwidths are being looked at, because there may or may not be more space, and we think there will be more space in these bandwidths, and broadband is marching across the country, and you know, this whole communications, telecommunications, internet, all this stuff that's going on, it's the Wild West now. And we really need an organization like Public Knowledge to kind of bring that information together, put it in a pile, explain it in a way that is important, because, you know, yeah, this show we usually do gadgets and things,
yeah,
and that's fun.
It is fun. We like gadgets.
Yeah, sure, but we've got to talk about the basic infrastructure. One of the reasons we do a policy show every now and then is because we've got to understand what the underlying structures and technology there is, because people are trying to pull pieces of that away for their own enrichment as opposed to the enrichment of us all.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. Remember a few years ago, the New England Patriots were playing a football game, and they had to kick a field goal, and it was snowing. And they called timeout and brought out a little scraper.
Snowblower thing. Yeah.
You know, a little cat, and scraped it off. After that game, they made a rule that you can't do that anymore. That's why you have to pay attention to the rules. We're like the guys that say, you know, we're the ones who are watching the rules committee and say, wait a minute, you know, look at what you're doing here. Look how the public is being affected. And that's not as fun as gadgets, but in some ways it's more long-lasting and more important.
Yeah, great. Well, Art, I want to thank you so much for coming back to visit us. We hope to have you back again. We are great supporters of Public Knowledge. I really, really enjoy the website, all the work that you and your group do, and I want to thank you so very much. And I hope all the people here in Montgomery County will come to take a look at it. Your website is www.publicknowledge.org.
Right.
And we look forward to having you back again sometime. But right now it looks like we're at the end, and we've run out of time for this edition of Observing Technology. So I want to thank you, Art.
My pleasure, Dennis.
And you're the Communications Director. I got to make sure I say that. Communications Director for Public Knowledge. And on the screen is the address of our website, the Capital PC User Group, www.cpcug.org. You can contact us through this site, ask questions, and there's links to things you've seen on the show. And we might even have a streaming video of this episode in case you'd like to review any of the segments. See you next time on Observing Technology.
Alone, our reach is limited. No matter how great our intentions, on our own, we can only stretch so far. But at Rotary, we believe the right group of people working together can make our communities, our world, a better place. Rotary, humanity in motion.